45 meetings, 42 signed documents, and not a single agreement that actually mattered. That is the story of Russia and China in 2026. And parts of this analysis were researched with AI tools, but every fact was verified by me. Putin walked into Beijing believing he was meeting an equal. He walked out with a folder of university exchange programs and media cooperation deals. The pipeline that was supposed to reshape Eurasian energy, still unsigned. The technology transfer that was supposed to save Russia's war machine, still one-sided. The friendship that was supposed to balance the West, quietly turning into something else entirely. Here is what I found fascinating when I started pulling on this thread. The transformation did not happen dramatically. There was no invasion, no ultimatum, no televised moment of submission. It happened the way water carves stone, slowly, invisibly. And by the time you notice the canyon, the river has already been running for decades. So let us rewind. Because to understand where Russia stands today, you have to go back to a moment when Putin genuinely held the cards. In 2006, China was energy fragile. Its industrial economy was growing at a pace that terrified its own planners. It needed natural gas, and it needed it reliably. Russia had the largest reserves on the planet, and a president who understood that energy was power. That year, the first memorandum of understanding for the power of Siberia 2 pipeline was signed. On paper, it looked like the beginning of a beautiful dependency. China dependent on Russia. Beijing did not sign the deal. Not in 2008, not in 2012, not in 2015, not after the Ukraine crisis, not after Western sanctions, not even after Russia became the most sanctioned country in human history following 2022. For 20 years, China sat across the table, nodded, smiled, and waited. And while it waited, it built. Liquefied natural gas import terminals on its coastline, nuclear plants in the interior, hydroelectric dams across its river systems, wind farms across the north, solar installations that now rank among the largest on Earth. China did not just weather the global energy crisis of the early 2020s. It used that crisis as a rehearsal. It stress-tested its own systems and emerged more energy independent than at any point in its modern history. By 2026, China does not need Russian gas the way it did in 2006. It wants it. And wanting something is completely different from needing it. Want gives you leverage. Need gives the other side leverage. The numbers confirm this shift in a way that is almost brutal. According to analysis from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, while the average price of natural gas in Europe sits around $450 per 1,000 cubic meters, Russia is currently selling to China at approximately $125. That is not a discount. That is closer to a clearance sale. And Beijing's demands at the negotiating table go even further. China wants prices aligned with Russia's own domestic market rates. It wants Moscow to absorb the entire construction cost of a 7,000-kilometer pipeline. And it refuses to offer any minimum purchase guarantee. Gazprom's CEO Miller flew to Beijing with Putin. He came home with an unsigned file. Think about that for a moment. Russia's largest energy company, the single most important commercial entity in the Russian state, left empty-handed. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is a supplier being told what its product is worth by the only customer left in the room. And here is the detail that changes everything about this dynamic. That window is closing. Within 10 years, China's transition to green energy may eliminate its need for Russian fossil fuels entirely. The power of Siberia. One pipeline already exists. A new Far East line is operational. Beijing has no supply emergency. Every year that passes without a deal is a year in which China's leverage grows and Russia's shrinks. Russia's biggest card, the one it has held for over a century, is expiring. And there is nothing in the hand to replace it. Nothing to replace it. Because the backup plan already failed. After Crimea's annexation in 2014, Putin stood before Russian television cameras and said, with full confidence, we can absolutely produce everything. This was the birth of the import substitution program. The idea was simple and politically powerful. Russia would cut its dependence on Western technology. It would build its own microelectronics sector, its own industrial software, its own advanced manufacturing base. It would become self-sufficient, a fortress economy. More than a decade later, according to reporting from Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service and corroborated by independent economic analysis, that program has effectively collapsed. Russia manufactures hundreds of drones, missiles, and artillery shells every month. That part is real. But look inside those weapons. The microchips are not Russian. The machine tools that produce the casings were not built in Russia. The industrial software running the assembly lines was not written in Moscow. Those components come through two channels, either Western-connected smuggling networks that route goods through third countries or directly from China. Russian economist Vladislav Inozemtsev has described this as a structural trap with no exit. In raw materials, Russia can theoretically find other buyers. Oil and gas can be rerouted, redirected, sold to India or Turkey or whoever is willing. But in high technology, there is no alternative market for Russia to buy from. China is the only supplier with both the capability and the willingness to sell. And if that relationship deteriorates, what Russia faces is not economic hardship. It is technological paralysis. Beijing knows this, and it is pricing accordingly. Investigative reporting from the Moscow Times, based on leaked customs data, found that Chinese suppliers raised prices on dual-use goods by 300%. In some categories, 500%. The microchips keeping Russian military drones in the air. The machine tools keeping munitions factories running. The electronic components inside Russia's satellite systems. All of it sold at monopoly prices. Because Beijing is the monopoly. And here is the part that reveals the true nature of this relationship. China is not giving Russia its best technology. Military-grade chips, the ones Beijing reserves for its own advanced systems, stay in China. What Russia gets is commercial-grade, B-tier components. The result shows up in the field. Russian satellites are malfunctioning at higher rates. Their operational lifespans are shortening. Accuracy rates on guided systems are dropping. Russia's space program, the program that launched Gagarin, that put the first human being into orbit, that once defined technological civilization, is now 90% dependent on Chinese imports. During the same period, China landed a rover on the far side of the moon, completed its own space station, moved into second place in the global space race. The student did not just catch the teacher. The student lapped the teacher. And now the teacher's program runs on parts the student sells at whatever price he chooses. This is not an alliance. This is a managed dependency. But the dependency extends beyond technology. It has moved into territory that touches something far more sensitive for Moscow, its own historical sphere of influence. According to data from the Eurasian Development Bank, China has surpassed Russia as the largest direct foreign investor across Central Asia, with total investment exceeding $35 billion. At a regional summit in October 2025, Putin himself acknowledged that Russia's investment figure was approximately $20 billion and described it in his own words as quite modest. Think about what that sentence represents. Vladimir Putin, at a summit in what Russia has historically considered its exclusive backyard, admitting that China is outspending him to 2-to-1 in his own neighborhood. The shift is not just in numbers. It is in the nature of the investment. China is building oil field infrastructure in Kazakhstan, solar energy installations in Uzbekistan, transport corridors and logistics hubs threading through all 5 Central Asian republics. This is the physical rewiring of a region's economic nervous system, and it is happening without Moscow's permission and without Moscow's ability to stop it. A Kazakhstani international relations expert named Yonbek Aronov articulated the distinction in a way that cuts to the core. China's approach is business. It is interested in economic returns and nothing else. Russia, by contrast, comes in caring about the status of the Russian language, about internal political structures, about historical memory and cultural alignment. Central Asian leaders increasingly prefer the approach that does not come with strings attached. For security guarantees, they are now looking to Beijing first. For infrastructure financing, Beijing first. For trade corridors, Beijing first. Russia bled for 3 years in Ukraine. China, without firing a single shot, became the economic guarantor of the region Russia spent centuries building. And then there is North Korea, which is where the contradictions inside this relationship become impossible to hide. Xi Jinping traveled to Pyongyang in June 2026 for the first time since 2019. That 7-year gap matters. It tells you that Beijing had, for years, kept Pyongyang at arm's length. But Russia's deepening relationship with Kim Jong-un changed Beijing's calculus. Since North Korean troops began supporting Russian operations in Ukraine in 2024, Moscow's influence over Pyongyang surged. Russia provided economic aid, advanced military technologies, and took a step that shook the entire regional order. It effectively recognized North Korea as a nuclear-armed state. Foreign Minister Lavrov described the issue as a closed matter. This is not a small thing. Decades of UN Security Council resolutions, many of them signed by Russia, were built on the principle of a denuclearized Korean peninsula. Moscow just walked away from that principle because it needed Pyongyang's troops and munitions. China was not consulted. China was not pleased. Kim Jong-un sent his own message ahead of Xi's arrival. On June 4th, he inaugurated a nuclear material production facility. On June 7th, his sister Kim Yo-jong declared nuclear status irreversible. South Korean officials estimate North Korea can now produce 10 to 20 additional warheads per year. According to Carnegie's Tong Zhao, China's concerns about North Korea center on regime stability, Korean unification under a pro-Western government, and American troops approaching Chinese territory. Russia does not share those concerns. Russia's trade relationship with South Korea has already collapsed, and Moscow is not particularly troubled by the prospect of a nuclear-armed Japan or South Korea as a geopolitical pressure point against the West. This is the sharpest crack inside the unlimited friendship. Two countries that present themselves as a unified front against the American-led order have fundamentally different interests regarding one of the most destabilizing actors on the planet. China wants regional stability in Northeast Asia. Russia is actively trading that stability for short-term military support. This contradiction does not break the partnership, but it reveals that it is a partnership between two countries that are, in important ways, working against each other while shaking hands for the cameras. The cameras, by the way, do not follow you to Siberia. East of the Ural Mountains, Russia holds one of the richest resource territories on Earth. It also holds one of the emptiest. Population density across that vast region sits below 1 person per square kilometer. 7 million Russians are distributed across a geography roughly the size of Canada. Directly across the border, in 3 Chinese provinces, more than 100 million people live. That pressure differential has a name in demography. It is called osmosis, and it flows from high concentration to low. As Russian men are conscripted and sent west to Ukrainian trenches, the demographic vacuum in Siberia fills. Chinese workers, investors, and entrepreneurs move into the space. Special economic zones established under Russian federal law, specifically Law 473-FZ, give Chinese firms exemptions from foreign worker quotas, tax relief, and reduced state oversight. Land leases extend to 49 years. 2 full generations. Chinese children born on that leased land will grow up knowing it as the place where they belong. And here is a detail that, when I first encountered it, made me stop and reread it twice. Maps published by China's Ministry of Natural Resources now label Russian cities by their Chinese names. Vladivostok appears as Haishanwai. Blagoveshchensk appears as Hailanpao. Beijing is not hiding this. These maps are official government publications. Beijing is quietly, in the language of cartography, reasserting a historical claim to territories transferred in 1860. This isn't confirmed as an official policy statement, but the maps exist, and they are not unofficial. The financial architecture of this dependency completes the picture. The most traded currency on the Moscow exchange is no longer the dollar. It is no longer the euro. It is the yuan. A significant portion of Russia's central bank reserves are now denominated in yuan. a currency that is not freely convertible, that Beijing controls, and that Beijing could effectively freeze with a single administrative decision. Russia's financial sovereignty, in any meaningful sense, has been outsourced to Beijing. The cultural transformation is slower, but it is visible. At Moscow's most expensive private schools, Chinese tutors have replaced English-speaking nannies. Mandarin enrollment at Russian universities is at record levels. Russia's most capable physicists and engineers are accepting positions in Shenzhen and Shanghai, offered salaries that the Russian state budget, currently directing 40% of its expenditure toward military production, cannot match. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov mentioned during the Beijing visit that his youngest daughter could speak Chinese before Russian, thanks to her nanny from Hubei province. His eldest daughter had, for many years, lived in Paris. A generation ago, Russian elites sent their children west. Now they send them east. The direction changed. The asymmetry did not. Now none of this means the partnership is about to collapse. Understanding why it holds together is just as important as understanding why it is unequal. Russia still holds the world's largest nuclear arsenal. It retains a permanent seat and veto power at the UN Security Council. These are not small things. China still wants cheap Russian energy, needs Arctic access for its northern shipping ambitions, and understands the strategic value of maintaining a coordinated front against Western institutions. According to analysis from the Council on Foreign Relations, the depth of cooperation between China and Russia since 2022 has no modern precedent. The closest comparison is the Sino-Soviet alliance of the early 1950s, and even that eventually fractured. The personal dimension matters too. Putin and Xi have met more times than either has met any other world leader. Xi once told Putin, in what appeared to be a genuine moment, that they share similar personalities. Birthday greetings, formal and informal, pass between them regularly. This is not purely transactional. But personal chemistry does not change structural math. Beijing's strategic calculation, when you strip away the summits and the ceremony, is precise and cold. China does not want Russia to collapse. A collapsed Russia means a power vacuum on its longest land border, a disrupted energy supplier, and the loss of its most reliable UN veto partner. But China also does not want Russia to recover, grow strong, and slip out of Beijing's orbit. A strong Russia is a Russia with options. A Russia with options is a Russia that can say no. China's optimal scenario is exactly where Russia is right now, fighting a war it cannot win quickly, crushed under the weight of the heaviest sanctions regime in history, dependent on Beijing for the components to keep its military running, for the trade channels to keep its economy breathing, for the financial infrastructure to keep its government funded. This is not accidental. This is the outcome Beijing has patiently and skillfully engineered. The longer the war in Ukraine continues, the more completely Russia falls into this position. Every month of war is a month of deepening dependency. Every sanction is a door that closes toward the West and opens toward China. Every Western firm that exits Russia is a Chinese firm that enters in its place. Time does not work equally for both sides in this relationship. There is one line in the Council on Foreign Relations analysis that I keep returning to. Russian intelligence services privately describe Chinese operatives as enemies, even as their governments embrace publicly. Chinese intelligence is actively collecting Russian military and technological secrets, espionage behind the handshake, surveillance beneath the smiles. This is the actual texture of the unlimited friendship. Putin built his entire post-2022 strategic architecture on the assumption that China was a partner of genuine equality, that the relationship would give Russia room to maneuver, leverage against the West, a path to a new multipolar order. What he got instead was a new dependency to replace the old one. He traded Western chains for Chinese ones, and the Chinese ones are, in some ways, tighter. Because at least the West was transparent about the conditions. Beijing never needed to issue an ultimatum. It simply waited and invested and waited some more.